And for a deeper look into the story, we are joined from Brussels by Dr. Kamila Zarikta-Romanovska, the professor of the European Union Law and Security Studies. Welcome, Dr. Romanovska. The European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen announced that the European Union will propose sanctions against extremist Israeli ministers and partially suspend its association agreement with Israel. In her State of the Union address, she also stated that bilateral support for Israel will be paused, though cooperation with Israeli civil society will continue. A previous proposal to limit Israel's access to EU research funding lacked member state support. So the Commission will act independently. How do you assess those moves, and are they sufficient? And why do you think the EU is acting now rather than earlier?
Well, first of all, we have to expect some kind of managed divergence when it comes to the acting. It's not full common line against Israel, but there are three forces which pull a little bit in the opposite direction. Because first of all, there's Council of the European Union arithmetics and legal threshold. Because anything more than targeted measures, such as destination violating settlers or specific minister, requires qualified majorities that are not there today, especially with Germany, Italy, and several Central European states, which are reluctant to greenlight trade measures that could rupture a key relationship. Moreover, there's a shift strategic focus after the last night Russia drones war over Poland and Warsaw from our Article 4 move. This is something which will make the reprioritization of alliance cohesion in air missile defense and the European Eastern Flank Watch. This is something which already has been addressed in the von der Leyen State of the EU, and this will require immediate term. This tends as well to lower appetite for intra-EU split on Israel, while joint deterrence measures vis-à-vis Russia. More importantly, there is as well domestic opinion pressure, because outrage at Gaza's humanitarian catastrophe is real and sustained in many member states. But it is a problem with which we can observe. It doesn't translate uniformly into the council majorities, nor into the societies. The most likely landing zone is a narrow, legally defensible, targeted package. The settlers, named office holders, etc. That preserves cooperation with Israeli civil society, balances proportionality, and avoids rupturing security ties at the time of heightened threats on the NATO frontier. So yes, this unity will be continued, and it won't be cured. A common line against Israel is very much unlikely, but there is a limited, targeted EU response paired with more robust humanitarian search and diplomacy, and that's realistic calling. This is important as well, because von der Leyen has shown that her credibility is not just about thoughtfulness and deliverability and consistency. It's as well political, because she's under very much pressure, heckling in the plenary, looming censorship attempts. In her SOTU, State of the European Union, she sought to demonstrate agency, posing bilateral payments to Israel, which excluding part of civil services and yet excluding civil society and Yad Vashem, proposing sanction on extremist ministers, violence settlers, and taking a partial special to the trade elements. Of course, this is something which translates into council-approved actions, and her credibility will rise. If they stall, again, she risks to all talk, no majority critique.
Yes.
More importantly, there is as well coherence across files. Ukraine, where the EU leads financially, including the proposed repatriation laws, the Eastern Flank, the Gaza, advancing the Eastern Flank Watch drone and Ukraine financing track would offset perceptions of drift, even if Israel package remained calibrated and incremental.
Well, the European Union Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas admitted that the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza is testing Europe's resolve because we're not united. You are expecting that this disunity would persist, which is practically in the way of implementing any of these measures. So do you see a growing public outrage eventually forcing Europe to act collectively against Israel?
Well, I have to say that the problem is that there is a problem of European public opinion as such, because we are, as Europeans, are very much having in heart what happened in Gaza. And humanitarian aid is not the same as recognition symbolism. It is vital not to lose the sight what actually saves life, and people think about it, supporting various humanitarian causes. But the political recognition within the society of the European Union, which is clearly much divided, there is more and more growing contrast between hard left and hard right. And the political recognition debate is as well doomed by this issue. So the contrast is here. The European humanitarian pipeline, the medical teams, food, shelter, water and sanitation and hygiene, cooperation, medicine, they have been continuously provided and in a large scale, and they are very much supported by the European society. But even though there are some controversies regarding UNRWA issue and US funding, which has halted in the 2025, the European society thinks about how to deliver the help and less about the political stance. And let's not forget, but we are having here the situation when EU already is funding through HCHO or ECHO and multiple partners, its own Palestine donor group as well. And plus a Gaza reconstruction instrument, they support it from wholehearted. But let's not forget that we have here now as well the crisis in Africa, which is persisting for a very, very long time, a human crisis of famine in Sudan, and in our corners, in our next to our external borders, we have Ukraine and Moldova who are suffering after the Russian attack on Ukraine. And unfortunately, this recalibrates focus from Palestine to those who are nearest, dearest, let me say it, and unfortunately requires certain recalibration as well when it comes to the continuous support. And we cannot forget what happened yesterday.
Yes,
because
exactly.
now when it draws, exactly, the swarm over Poland was not an abstraction. It triggered Article 4 and rapid multi-air defense response. And von der Leyen Eastern Flank Watch drone goal, space-based surveillance and a drone alliance with Ukraine reflects the right military technological priority for the Union that must defend the skies and infrastructure now. Not
Dr.
only
Romanovska,
them.
France, Spain and the UK condemned the Israeli strike on Qatar yesterday. Now, with Washington also signaling displeasure, do you see Europe maybe seizing this moment to carve out an independent position from the US?
Well, a generally independent EU line is unlikely to diverge sharply from Washington on core security interests. But the strike inside Doha strengthens European instincts to close rank with Qatar. Not against it. For decades, Qatar has been a pivotal stabilizer. It hosts and mediates sensitive talks, including those Hamas-Israel ceasefire and hostage tracks, facilitates evacuation and medical transfer, bankers humanitarian corridors, and anchors US-EU crisis management from Al Udeid, the largest US base in the Middle East. Undercutting Doha sovereignty would damage the one capital that has consistently kept channels open when others were shut. The Qatar Coast Guard is a part of the stability story. In recent years, it had fired a modern fleet of fast interceptors and offshore patrol vessels, improving whole maritime domain awareness, SIR, the energy infrastructure protection in waters through which is significant, a shared EU-relevant LNG flows. Those capabilities, buoyed up with major deliveries from regional shipyards, make Doha a credible maritime security partner at precisely the moment Houthis spill over and the state, non-state joint threats are proliferating. For Brussels and key capitals, the policy implications are straightforward. Lean into Doha mediation and maritime stability role, condemn attacks on its soul, and coordinate closely with Qatar to keep a diplomatic strikes life. That autonomy leads to partnership, not to extradiment. And that's extremely important for all Europeans.
Well, do you think even if many European states are condemning the Israeli strike that took place in Qatar yesterday, do you think that then maybe Israel will be losing the Western allies? Or do you think it matters even if Israel loses the Western allies? Do you think it will affect them even if they have economic sanctions being imposed against them?
Well, thinking ahead, we have to look at what really happened. Even today, at the State of the EU, Ms. von der Leyen explicitly called Gaza situation as unacceptable and announced a pause of bilateral payments to Israel, proposed sanction extremist minister settlers, and part of suspension association agreement trade pillar. That balance with a clear statement on Israel's security, Hamas nurtured the imperative of release hostages and immediate ceasefire. There are something really important when it comes to the foreign policy and foreign affairs of the European Union. Clearly, this is the speech Ms. von der Leyen made today are front-loaded drones and the Eastern Front. And it's of course important, but let's not forget that this is reflecting not only EU immediate hard security focus, but as well this speech shown today that there is something extremely important, which is material, but as well limited steps, which require more action to be done when it comes to the security on the MENA region. That pivotal role is of the Gaza and the stability within the region. So yes, I think this will change a bit but still the humanitarian primacy will win over performatic politics. Mm-hmm. And the EU and its member states remain along as the largest funders of actual deliveries, the medical stops, full fuel, logistics into the Gaza, or via UN or NGO partners. And even there have been those controversies which we already heard about. European Parliament's joint motion of the resolution, which is going to be voted tomorrow, makes the same call. Scale humanitarian access, restore UN channel with robust accountability, release hostages, move towards a two-state track. And that's important. And it's important this action that is happening now because those two triggers covered. First, the fact on the ground in Gaza, the food insecurity and famine areas, continued hostilities and settler violence made the prior EU posture politically unsustainable in the parliament and across the parts of the council. Second thing, and this is really crucial, is the security frame that shifted. Last night, John instruction to the porous airspace force us to prioritize allied air defense, escalatory risk management, and Eastern Front resilience. The von der Leyen package pairs Middle East measures with European joint alliance with Ukraine and Eastern Flank Watch and support for Baltic Polish drone war. This message is that Europe can uphold humanitarian law and harden after its defense without sleepwalking into strategic overextension. That's really important because, well, let's say we can ask about whether it's sufficient or not. But these are sellings which are feasible without breaking EU unity and movement when NATO cohesion is being tested. Mm-hmm. Their adequacy will be judged.
Well, let's look at some of the measures that are actually being implemented. Spain has permanently banned the arms exports to Israel and imposed sanctions on far-right Israeli ministers. Describing Israel's war on Gaza as a genocide, officially, how significant is it that a major European Union state is now using such legal and diplomatic language? What precedent could this set for the rest of Europe?
Well, it's significant norm-shaping, but not yet system-changing. Spain's steps expand the permissible policy envelope inside the EU, embolden like midden parliament, and create reputational pressure in Council working group. Yet, as long as the core member states remain cautious and the US strategies stays engaged in Israeli deterrence, we should expect a sort of a patchwork. National measures plus EU-level listing on violent satellite plus Commission proposal that face rule Council arithmetics short. In short way, Madrid's move matters, but the center of EU gravity remains calibrated, especially amid an acute drone air defense crisis on a NATO border. But let's not forget that we are just ahead of the UN summit. And this, whatever happens then, can change a lot.
Mm-hmm. Well, what about the attack on the Sumud flotilla carrying aid and activists like Greta Thunberg? What sort of condemnation or what sort of action do you think will result from the international condemnation for such an attack? Do you think it will lead to any measures being implemented, or the rhetoric of the global condemnation?
Well, if independently verified and widely broadcast, such attacks on international activists, especially if figures like Greta Thunberg are aboard, can produce a sharp, short-term opinion spark, particularly among young voters in northwestern Europe. They also shape the narrative framework from battlefield conduct to the freedom of navigation and civilian protection, as well as SAR regulation and the law of the sea. That said, newsrooms are now saturated, of course, with the Poland drone crisis. But unless it's really high fidelity imaginary on injuries, the flotilla story risks being submerged by already mentioned about the Article 4 moment of, and in policy terms, Parliament will cite such incidents. The Council bandwidth will remain on deterrence in the East, but the problem is that there will be rather a mainstream corroboration of the flotilla incident, which is still limited, and impact will short track verification and media salience.
But it's not the first time this happens.
Yes, indeed, but we could see on the other situation that this actually led to the raise of support and crowdfunding when it comes to financial support to Ms. Thunberg. So those global Sumud flotilla and purported drone attacks clearly can be addressed by, for instance, Commission statement or the statement of Kaja Kallas, our representative of foreign affairs. But in my opinion, this news will be short-lived because, unfortunately, for the Europeans now, the attack on their soul and on the borders and real genocide, which is happening, for instance, in Gaza, it's far more important than political activists from Miss Greta Thunberg
yes.
organization.
Well, Dr. Romanovska, 116 former MEPs, including the former European Union chief diplomat Josep Borrell, have urged suspending the EU-Israel Association Agreement. Do you see this pressure from within Europe's own political establishment as a turning point in EU policy, or will it remain merely symbolic?
Well, I have to be absolutely honest. Working for a very long time, over 15 years in the European Parliament and institution, I have to say that letter from those MEPs is mostly symbolic, unless it lands inside institution legislative machine. Ex-MEPs can shape the debate, but formal traction comes from the Parliament's group and the Council. Where we do see actionable momentum is now in the European Parliament's various resolutions. This week, Gaza at the breaking point, pressing famine relief, hostage release, and all those steps which needs to be taken toward two states. The vote is scheduled on Thursday, and that will be something which is really important because we can expect that in the hemicycle, important final discussion will take part. The Socialists, Green, part of Renew and the Left, have hardened their position and nudged the European Commission and the Council. But ultimate trade pillar suspicion still needs to be qualified by the majority of member states. And let's not forget, it's something really important. And I hope I don't kill please don't kill the messenger here. But those former MEPs are quite often not former by choice of their self. And this is as well a possibility to return into the mainstream media and to have, let's say, another media possibility or press release, or being seen again in the north of the political debate within Europe. Of course, Mr. Borrell is on his retirement from the policy and policy shaping, but quite a big chunk of those MEPs are unfortunately those who hasn't been re-elected, this is their chance to actually return within this very important issue back to the spotlight, even for it won't going to be only for a few moments of the TV or press time or radio time.
So if all these measures or proposals or sanctions that are proposed by European Union institutions are merely symbolic or pending a unanimous decision by all member states, so do you feel that maybe the solution or the way for imposing really any concrete measures would be taken by European states, such as Spain, individually, independently?
Most likely, yes, because unfortunately, those measures which we can talk today about, let's say our package regarding the situation in Gaza, they are legally calibrated and implementable. That's something which this is something which Ms. von der Leyen chose, because they are targeted listing, trade pillar, partial suspension, payment pause, with humanitarian carve-outs. They won't satisfy maximalists, but they are designed to deter ministerial incitement and settler violence, uphold EU treaty values and association agreements, human rights clause, and more importantly, preserve humanitarian primacy within the EU as such, and with the EU theater. But unfortunately, real actions can be done by the member state, especially if Spain and other countries which are supporting this cause will, for instance, introduce at the European Council meeting a special motion to start the legislation towards the, for instance, recognition or EU drugs and foods and medicines being really, let's say, organized within, for instance, the program. EU is acting now to align institutions with public sentiment, to answer the parliament before Thursday votes, to restore internal cohesion after months of drift, and reprioritize, of course, drone and air defense today. But their balance is deliberate. The humanitarian leadership plus targeted pressure on specific Israeli office holders, this is something which will work, while keeping cooperative channels open to the, for instance, European civil society and Qatar-led mediation offers after the Doha strike. Because the bottom lines here are pretty important. There are two theaters and one agenda. This week, drones and NATO is more important than any other issue. Gaza remains morally central, but is institutionally lower because of anonymity rules. Humanitarian primacy over symbolic votes remains important. EU humanitarian pipeline continues at scale, even as UN politics fracture. That's where Europe's comparative advantage and credibility lie. More important, the Qatar matter, protecting Qatar's sovereignty and mediation role in European security interest, diplomatically, because of the hostages, of ceasefire military, and more importantly, strategically. This is why von der Leyen.
Well, it seems that von der Leyen, the European Union seems to be taking steps to sanction Israel and condemn its crimes, while the US continue to shield Israel. How do you think this could affect the relationship between the European Union and the US, or the US and the individual European states that are taking measures?
Well, France, Spain, and United Kingdom condemned the Israeli strike on Qatari soil. The Washington signaled its displeasure. We can expect that Europe is going to defend Qatari sovereignty and the integrity of a critical mediation hub, just to posture anti-US, because Qatar hosts Al-Udeid, the region's largest base, and CENTCOM, Forward HQ, and it's central to de-escalation and hostage diplomacy. The EU interest is convergent. Keep Qatar viable as a mediator, protect Gulf stability, and safeguard NATO equities.
Yes.
Also, recognize Qatar as a practical security role. For instance, its Coast Guard has been substantially modernized, like RS-150 Hercules, Fast Patrol, etc., underpinning Gulf maritime security. This is asset that Europe quietly relies on for regional stability and move Qatar forward EU line, like banking mediation, maritime security, in both principled and strategically prudent.
Yes.
And it still leaves room to insist
Definitely.
on HIL compliance by all armed actors.
Dr. Kamila Zarikta-Romanovska, the Professor of European Union Law and Security Studies, thank you very much for joining us here on In Depth.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
As Israel's war on Gaza continues and its aggression now spills into Qatar, Europe finds itself at a decisive moment. Sanctions and condemnations are growing. Spain is calling it genocide, and the European Union will propose sanctioning extremist Israeli ministers and a partial suspension of the European Union's association agreement with Israel. The question now is whether Europe will rise to its own values or remain complicit in silence. I'm Henny Saif. Thank you for watching.